Hi there, this is Tony from pianotone.ca, and in this video I'm going to touch on a couple of things. Mostly it's about my experiences learning how to play piano with a chord-based approach using non-traditional piano fingering as opposed to traditional. And I'll also talk about a really useful exercise for helping to learn your chord inversions that traditional fingering really lends itself to well. And on a side note, this is the first video that I'm going to be making using Chord, which is an app that I use to display the light-up keys, music notation, and chord names while I play. I did do a review on Chord that I'll link to below if you want to check it out. I'm also using an app called OBS Studio to actually make the video. It combines active windows on my PC along with multiple cameras into one display for the video. It's a free app that has a ton of features, and I have no experience with it, and I don't really know much about it. But I will probably do a basic video on just how to use it to make piano videos like these, so watch out for that on the channel. But for now, let's check out the discussion on traditional piano fingering versus non-traditional. Okay, so one thing that I do want to make clear right at the start of this video is that I am not telling you to play one way or the other. I just wanted to share my experiences. Piano playing is supposed to be fun, so do what works for you. Now, if you are taking piano training from an app, an online course, a book, or even the old-fashioned way from a human, then there's probably a 90% chance that you're being taught to use traditional fingering. Which in a general sense is one key per finger, and your fingers will be assigned numbers when you first start training to help you along. So your thumb is on your right hand is finger 1, pointer finger 2, 3, 4, and 5. The general idea behind traditional fingering is to help you find notes more quickly and efficiently, and to provide a more consistent and efficient way of moving up and down the keyboard. For example, when you have your thumb on middle C here, this is C position, and when you're in C position, once you get familiar with it, because it's one key per finger, so C, D, E, F, G, you'll know that when you're in C position that your fourth finger is F, just because you're used to it. And this is not only helps you find notes quickly, but if you're somebody who wants to learn sight reading, then traditional fingering can really help with that. For example, if you've just read a C note on your sheet music, and then you see a note that is 2 notes up on the staff and you don't necessarily know what that is, you know that it's going to be an E, because if you're in the key of C, then you know that when you're in C position, 2 notes up is going to be the E key. So it can actually be kind of a shortcut in sight reading somewhat. Now, as far as traditional fingering helping you move up and down the keyboard efficiently, if you think of the traditional way to play a C scale, this is probably how you've been taught in a course that is teaching you scales. And a C scale, a C major scale, is all the white notes on the piano. You're going to start with your thumb, 1, 2, 3, and then you're going to tuck your thumb under, go to F, and then back down. That time you tuck over with your third finger. So once you get used to that, that's something that can translate to other scales as well, once you get used to that movement, and it is basically an efficient way to move up and down the keyboard. Because you don't see a lot of wrist movement and turning and stuff as I'm doing that. So it is an efficient way to move up and down the keyboard. So if we forget about sight reading and scales for now and focus on using traditional fingering with a chord-based approach to learning piano, where you're learning chords, a major chord, for example, a C major chord, will still have you in that traditional fingering position, and you'll be playing the chord with your first, third, and fifth finger. With the thought being that since you are in a familiar position, you can quickly and easily transition between playing a chord and then going to your scale and that type of thing. Now, in many chord-based piano courses, which do not include much or possibly even any sheet music, you may be told what traditional fingering is and that you should still use it, or you may be told what it is but do whatever works for you. Or you may not be told about it at all, and may be told to use a different fingering method that may make some things easier when playing chords. So to share my experiences with all of this, when I first started playing, the course I was in discussed different fingering methods, but the instructor tended to play chords mostly with fingers 1, 2, and 3. So that's how I started. A couple advantages of this method. First of all, it can be a bit easier when you are first getting started, because your pinky finger is going to be a little bit weaker than your third finger. So when you haven't built up any finger strength yet, especially if you're using a weighted key digital piano or acoustic piano, it's going to be a little bit easier to play that third note of the chord with your middle finger than with your pinky, just simply because your middle finger is likely to be a little bit stronger. And a functional advantage of this method is that when you start to play more complex chords, like let's say a seventh chord, then you need actually to free up either your fourth finger or your pinky to play that fourth note if you're playing a four-note chord. Traditional fingering will actually switch to that method anyways when you do that. So that's another reason to consider using that type of a method, is to free up an additional finger. So I spent my first year happily playing piano and learning songs with this fingering method using 1, 2, and 3, and everything was progressing along nicely. If you follow my channel, you know that I'm a piano course sponge, and I often take on more than I should at times. And as I dove into more and more courses, I started to encounter traditional fingering more often. So I thought, let's give this a try. Now, I have to say that was a frustrating few weeks. Songs that sounded great before suddenly sounded terrible, and it was really challenging getting my fingers used to that different fingering. I was about 2 or 3 weeks into it, and then was almost ready to give up and go back when things finally started to click a little bit, so I stuck with it. And in another couple of weeks, all was well, and my songs started to sound just like they did before. Now I play with traditional fingering probably about 80% of the time. There are still occasions when non-traditional fingering just seems to work better for me. For example, a inverted D major chord like this, I just find easier to play with non-traditional fingering, which is 1, 2, and 3 like that, as opposed to the traditional way, which would be like this. So there are some exceptions where I still revert back to non-traditional. But I have to say that for me, this change has definitely improved my playing. If I had never made this change and was still playing with non-traditional fingering all the time, would it have been a disaster? No, not at all. I'm sure I'd still be happily playing, learning songs, and getting better. But I do think that it was a good change for me to make. And now that I have made that change, I do think I'm able to do some things a little bit easier and maybe faster than I would have been able to if I hadn't made the change. So that brings me to my example, which has to do with chord inversions. And a great exercise to not only practice your inversions, but also as a way to find them easier and as a way to move up and down the keyboard during a song in kind of a really cool way. So chord inversions, if you're not familiar with them, I'll include a link below to a video I did a while back, interestingly, back when I was not using traditional fingering, explaining what chord inversions are and why you should learn them. But the basic idea of a chord inversion is to play the same notes of a chord only in a different order. This not only allows you to change how a song sounds, but it can also make a song significantly easier to play by playing all the chords in the song a little bit closer together, so you don't have to travel up and down the keyboard as much. So if I take a C major chord and move the bottom note, which is the root C, up an octave to here, like that, that's going to be first inversion. Then when I take the next note on the bottom, this E, and move it up to that E, that's going to be second inversion. And then when I take this G note and move it up an octave, I'm back up to root position, but an octave higher. Now, before I started using traditional fingering, I would practice this with fingers 1, 2, and 3 like this. I'd practice moving from chord to chord. And then I started to practice them with arpeggios, which is a great exercise, actually, to get really familiar with your inversions. Now this works, but with this fingering, it's a really big stretch between my index and middle finger in first inversion, and then between my thumb and my index in second inversion. Now this isn't the end of the world or anything, and it does work, and I played inversions this way for a year. But if you take a look at how much my fingers have to stretch and the angle I have to have my wrist at and how that kind of changes and how much bending movement there is in my wrist as I move up and down, and then compare that to doing this with traditional fingering, you can see with traditional fingering, my wrist isn't really kind of moving up and down. It's just a smoother transition up and down. And I'm keeping my hand straighter, and it's actually more comfortable as well. And that results in being able to play faster, smoother, and more accurately as you continue to practice. So that's enough about traditional fingering. I do think it was a great change for me to have made, and I think my play and ability to play more challenging things has improved as a result. If you were to ask me whether I would recommend traditional fingering, I would probably say yes. But once again, I'm not a piano instructor, so do what feels good for you and what feels right, and have fun. Now, I also do want to talk a little bit more about this inversion exercise and how useful it can be. Now, although I think this exercise is easier using traditional fingering, it's still a great exercise if you don't use traditional fingering. So regardless of your fingering choices, take a good look at the shapes of the inversions as I move up and down. So here's root position. Now, first inversion, the two notes on the left are closer together, and the note on the right is further apart. Second inversion, the higher two notes are closer together, and then back up to the root position again. Now, if you really get used to keeping these shapes in mind as you do these exercises, it can really help you find inversions for any chord much more quickly. So for example, let's try this with a G chord. Now, if I start in G root position, now instead of trying to figure out, okay, what are the notes in a G chord? Okay, it's G, B, and D, and now I need to find the next G, B, and D, but put them in a different order. Instead of thinking about all of that, just think about the shapes. So once again, take a look at the shapes here. Now just try those same shapes with G major. Now I'm not thinking about what notes those are, I'm just going ahead and playing them. So I'll often practice this common chord progression both with solid chord inversions as well as arpeggiating my way up and down. And since I'm just thinking about the shapes, the chord inversions are super easy to find. You can do the same thing with arpeggios as well. And then work through the chord progression as well. Now with chords that make use of the dreaded black notes, it may not be quite as easy, but just because you're using black keys, the shapes are still the same. So I do actually try to regularly practice a new chord with this exercise that has black keys in it, so that when I encounter those in a song that I'm learning, I'm used to those at least a little bit. For example, if I do this for a D chord, a D major, which has an F sharp in it, the shapes are still the same. And then you can practice those with the arpeggios as well. Oops. So is this exercise only useful for helping you learn and practice inversions, or can you put it to use in a song? You can totally put this to use in a song to spice up your playing and improv. I use this all the time, actually, as a way to add in a fill or as a smooth way to easily transition your play up and down an octave for effect in the song. So as a quick example of this, and also to show how inversions can make a song easier to play, I'm going to use Knocking on Heaven's Door. The chords for this song alternate between G major, D major, A minor, then G major, D major, and C major, and they just do that over and over again for the entire song, actually. So it's actually a great song for a beginner to work on. Now the G and the D chords, those are a long way away from each other. So I'm going to switch from G down to G with second inversion. Now I'm quite a bit closer to D, but it's still quite a bit of a travel to get to A minor. So I'm going to use the first inversion of G instead. So that's the root. That was the second. But now I'm going to go down to this inversion, which is the second inversion of G. And then now I'm a lot closer to that A minor chord. Then to go to the D chord, all I have to do in this case, instead of going back up to the root, I'm already on that note, that D, all I have to do is switch to this. And now I'm in using the second inversion of D, and I'm really, really close to A minor, because then now to get to A minor, I just have to do that, and I can use the root of A minor. So you can see how inversions can make a song easier to play by just basically moving the chords physically closer together. And then for the second little part of the song, then I'll just go use that same G chord, the same D chord, and then the C major root is just right there. So the whole progression would be like this. And I'm just going to play some octaves roots in my left hand. So that's basically the progression. But how can I use inversions and arpeggiated inversions to spice up my play? Well, you can just move back and forth between different positions of a chord, different inversions for effect. And you can either do that with solid chords or with an arpeggio, and you can see what sounds good. Even move up an octave by using that method. And then move back down. So really easy way to spice up your play. Now, I do have to say that, in my opinion, traditional fingering does actually really help with this, because your hands aren't bending and twisting as much and your fingers aren't stretching as much. Your hands move up and down in a much more controlled kind of a manner. So that's pretty much it. I just wanted to share what my experiences have been with the fingering styles, and also that inversion exercise, which has been super helpful for me in getting comfortable with inversions. So that's pretty much it. I just wanted to share my experiences between the different fingering approaches, and also that inversion exercise, which has been super helpful to me in getting comfortable with inversions. So I'll leave some links below to some other videos of mine, one on chord inversions and the other one on my review for the Chord app that displays the light up keys. Once I get around to making a video on how to set up OBS Studio, Chord and multiple cameras to make videos like this, then I'll add a link to that as well. So thanks so much for checking out this video. Feel free to smash the like button. That really helps me out. And subscribe if you want to make sure you don't miss any future posts. Happy piano playing and have an awesome day.